G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast. My name's Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke, and I'm also your host. Another 12 months has flown by, and we've just finished recording another successful instalment of the Cattleman Series at the 3R Beef Annual Studs Sale, which is held at the historic Gunnerganoo station in Tamworth, New South Wales. This year, we've managed to secure 3 high-caliber guests, which I interviewed again in a panel-type format. The guests are industry leaders Bryce Camm of CammAg Group, Robert Gill of Alexander Downs, and Geoff Birchnell of 3R Angus Genetics. This episode was a live recording at the pre-bull sale dinner again, and if you're patient with the audio, it will be well worth it. Now, each year we have a theme, and this year's theme was consistency. And it's backed off the famous quote from Tony Robbins, which goes, "Consistency is what transforms average into excellence." Now, in this episode, it'll offer a rare behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to thrive in the beef industry, from breeding and genetics to navigating the challenges of the supply chain. Our panellists will discuss the importance of consistency in maintaining Australia's premium beef quality, adapting to changes, and maximising profitability. So whether you're in the cattle business or just passionate about the quality of beef, this conversation is packed with practical wisdom and forward-thinking strategies that you won't want to miss. So strap yourself in and let's kick off the Fireside Chat with Bryce Camm, Robert Gill and Geoff Birchnell. Now, let's get this thing kicked off. So Geoff and I obviously have a good long conversation about what we're going to do for these episodes, and I was listening to a podcast recently, and they said that there's a fair bit of change coming in the next 10 years. And a futurist, so that's someone that just full-time thinks about what's going to happen in the future. And they work for companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft, and that's all they do. And he reckons the change we're going to see over the next 10 years will be more than what we saw in the last 100. So I want you to just think about that. If we go back 100 years from now, that was 1924. And if you think about 1924, the agricultural practices or the world's practices that were in place were completely different from what they are today. I mean, most people were farming using a horse and dray. Tractors were just starting to come out after the First World War, and it was completely different. Now, with change, that obviously can be unsettling for plenty of people because it requires adjustment. But it also provides a lot of potential because with change comes opportunity. And as commercial producers on farm, you're probably thinking, well, if there's all this change coming, what should we be focusing on? And my personal opinion, and also Geoff's as we were chatting about this, was we want to remain profitable and we want to remain sustainable. And if we want to do that, we've got to extract the maximum we can out of our production system. And to do that, we've got to maintain our premium pricing position around the world. Now, how do we actually maintain that premium pricing position when we're a high-cost producer and everyone else is low-cost? And to do that, we've got to remain producing a product that is excellent. And so how do we remain excellent? Well, Tony Robbins had a great quote that I wrote down here, which is, consistency is what transforms the average into excellent. And so every year, Geoff and I try and come up with a theme, and this year is going to be consistency. And so to talk about that, Geoff's already introduced us to 2 of our panel guests, and both of them are deeply invested in the ag industry and also the supply chain of the ag industry. So I'd like to welcome Bryce Camm, who's here on my left, Robert Gill, and we've also got Geoff this year, who took a fair bit of arm twisting to agree to sit on the panel and share his views. But I've done a couple of interviews with Geoff now on the road, and he always does a great job. So Bryce, for those who you don't know, Bryce hails from Dalby in Queensland, another Queenslander, and he's been overseeing his family's Camm Agricultural Group, an integrated beef and cropping enterprise. He's been CEO of the company for 9 years now, and he previously managed their award-winning Wonga Plains feedlot for 8 years. And over that time, he tripled the size of the feedlot. Bryce is the current chairman of Beef Australia. He's the director of Cattle Australia. He has previously held other industry positions, including President of the Australian Lot Feeders Association, Chairman of the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, and a Director of the Red Meat Advisory Council. Very busy man, Bryce. Beside him, we have Robert Gill. Robert and his family run Alexander Downs in Merriwell. Robert and his dad moved to Alexander Downs in 1973, and just quietly, that was just before I was born, Robert. A while ago, hey. And his grandchildren who are on the property are now the fourth generation. They breed cattle on their property. They fatten them in their feedlot with approximately 5,000 head on feedlot, 2,000 backrouting on self-feeders and another 3,000 in the feedlot. And they produce 200 head a week, go to Woolworths. And I think Robert was saying next year they'll be their 40th year of supplying Woolworths. So one of, if not the longest supplier of beef to Woolworths here in Australia. They also own an abattoir based down in Curry. They process about 400 head a week through the abattoir, 200 for themselves through their own wholesale businesses, and 200 service kills for other people. And finally, on the end, we've got Geoff. You all know Geoff, but a little bit of a history for anyone listening on the podcast and anyone who doesn't know Geoff's background. Geoff started his first herd, Avignon Herefords, at age 9. I remember that back in the day when we were young. And he bought his own block. He studied accounting at university and worked for nearly a decade in a major Brisbane firm, where he gained insights into the large-scale beef production clients based mostly in Queensland. Now, luckily for all of us, Geoff decided that accounting wasn't for him. So he came over from the dark side, as I call it, and because he envisaged a full-time working in the beef industry, which he managed to pull off a number of years ago. Geoff travelled extensively through South America and America, cultivating friendships with industry leaders, and has now transformed Avignon with his partners into 3R Livestock back in 2018. This is their third bull sale, and we're looking for a cracker of an event tonight. So without further delay, I'd love you all to give our guests a round of applause. Now, enough from hearing from me. We want to hear from the guests. So I want to kick this off with something really optimistic. And all three guests here are deeply invested in the ag industry, both personally and also financially. So I'd like to start with Bryce and say, could you just share your thoughts in just a couple of minutes, highlighting the key trends or opportunities that make you so optimistic about the beef industry, mate?
Well, first of all, thanks so much to the team and particularly Geoff for this invitation to be with you all tonight. It is a fantastic venue. I guess optimism, I said to Ben, he didn't ask me how my day was to see how optimistic I was going to be in this speech. But I guess coming from a family in ag, there's probably three parts to why we look at optimism, particularly from a personal perspective, but also around our business. I guess we see the macroeconomics globally around beef production in Australia and demand to be very good. And I won't go on that channel for a long time. We probably don't transcribe to the maybe Simon Quilty's view of 2027, although I think it looks very rosy, but we are positive around price and demand, I guess, from a production system of nations that can produce the volume of export beef and high quality beef that Australia does today and can going forward. I think the second piece is more of a wider view of why I think we're in ag, and me personally. There's not many businesses that you can start with a little bit and grow to a bigger thing. Most other businesses that you're involved in, you are starting at a higher level and decreasing all of the time. Resources, your coal mine eventually runs out. Retail, you start at a high price, you've usually got to discount it out to get out of it. Service industry, accounting, law, you only have a certain amount of time in the day, and as that stopwatch starts, it decreases for the rest of the day. In cattle, we're all in the business of breeding more cattle. Or if you're a cotton farmer or a cropper, you start with 1 tonne of seed and hopefully grow 1,000. And I think that's pretty exciting, and I don't actually think we talk about that enough in the sector. And one piece that being in this very building, on this very property, that 200 years ago, AA remains the longest serving continual business operating in this country, is pretty cool. Now, we've all got lots of judgment about AA and how it's running and when it's going to pay a dividend and all the things we like to poke fun at. But it is quite amazing that an agricultural business is our longest serving business in this country that continues to grow. So that, for me, is one of the mainstays that I just, in terms of this business, it is increasingly positive. And I think for growing families and growing enterprises, agriculture is a great space to be in, but also around beef. And I think the final piece that I'm optimistic is just the evolution. You talked about change, but I think in one space that the next 10, 15, 20 years is the dynamic shift that is going to change in terms of custodianship of the land in which a lot of us operate. And I'm just talking about the sheer reality of generational shift in business ownership and land ownership across the ag sector. I don't know the answer that's going to solve that, but it's going to be an interesting journey, and I'm pretty keen to be a part of it.
Thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight. My optimism, like the young people that's coming through ag, it really excites me. I recently went up to Beef 24, and the amount of young people that's participating in ag today, particularly young women, it reminds me of my younger day that we started from very little, and the people that helped us grow where we are was young people, like young nutritionists, young agronomy. I can't say young, well, they were young bank managers, but then all of a sudden I became older than the bank manager, so that wasn't real good. And I look at our young people in our business now, and I'm 71 and my son's at 47 and 36, and their children are 19 and under. And the inspiration and they're willing to work and they're willing to listen. And when they put it together, you know, Australia's got a great future. Another thing that excites me is the quality of cattle. You know, we witnessed there today that the top end of the cattle I thought were very, very good. And if we can keep moving forward with quality cattle and produce quality meat that people can enjoy, we're going to go forward. I do worry a bit about the lack of kill space. I think we've got plenty of cows in Australia, and if things do get a little bit pear-shaped, I can see a little bit of a problem coming. But if we've got quality cattle, they'll be the last to be affected.
I guess for me, why I'm so optimistic about the future of agriculture is probably just around the culture that we have in this industry. And I'm not aware of any other industry that fosters so much enthusiasm and invests so much into the people within our industry with a mindset that's not competitive. We all benefit together. And I think that's really unique. And I think we probably don't give that due credit, but we are in an industry where you can ask a question and get a genuine response and there's no competitive fear amongst us. And I just think it's a wonderful life to live this. We're all privileged to be part of it and to live this every day. And we've got a really good culture of support. So those three ingredients to me I just think the future looks brilliant.
You've worked bloody hard to build a profitable, scalable and well-run operation. But now, as your children are finishing their education and starting to take an interest in the family business, you're realising it's time to shift focus. It's no longer just about farm prosperity. It's now about family prosperity. You need to align your family, start preparing the next generation, improve communication and strengthen family relationships. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. And that's why we created the High Performing Families Workshop to guide families through this crucial transition. Want to know more? Head over to www.agricoach.com.au/take action. Now, let's head back to the episode. So Bryce, we're going to kick off with you again, mate. So thanks for those comments. It makes me feel really good about the industry as well. Australia's a high-cost producer of beef compared to our overseas competitors who, a lot of the larger scale ones are very low-cost producers. So I want to ask you, with our theme being consistency, how important do you think consistency is to securing that competitive advantage that we have and then maintaining those markets that provide the premium price and also maintaining that premium price for our cattle?
I think consistency, it is critical to that. I guess, particularly when you think about from a customer point of view, now we know that customers can be fickle. You've only got to look at market trends. Kale. No one likes kale. but all of a sudden we all had to eat kale. And I visited a seed producer at Withcott, and they were growing the seedlings for kale, and they couldn't keep up for 1 month, and then kale's gone, and now they've got too much kale. So those types of trends aren't good for consistency. And we all know that breeding a line of cattle is not a chop and change short-term gig. And pastoral enterprises tend to be like the Titanic, to change direction rather quickly. But I guess longer term trends around reliability or consistency of supply, high quality, and I guess a quality assurance or a way of backing up those credentials is what Australia has hung its hat on for a long time. And we are such an export reliant market. Now, I know the domestic market here is absolutely crucial to us as our largest market, but for the greater majority of our beef, it is headed off overseas. And so I guess those longer term trends about eating quality, consistency, and that being of a high quality nature are really important. And I think it's a balance, I guess, operationally. Although we are a high cost producer, the cost of living pressures that we're all facing here, particularly with food inflation, are magnified so much more globally at the moment, particularly through the US and other parts of the global economy. So while we are a high cost producer, maintaining our cost base and controlling that or driving productivity are the big pieces that we've also got to overlay.
Yeah, consistency is always really hard, isn't it, to try and maintain over time. So thanks for that, Bryce. Robert, so as I said in the introduction, you've done something that a small number of producers have been able to do, which is breed your cattle, fatten your own cattle in your feedlot, and then process them through your abattoirs and then sell them through the butcher shops, which is that whole end-to-end process. And so you're across all levels of the supply chain, which must keep your head very, very busy from time to time, keeping on track of all those things. So how do you see in the future we're going to be able to create better quality beef to supply and a more consistent product?
Consistent is probably my middle name. I like a quote, a chap I bought the wholesale business off in 95, and he used to get to me this quote. He said, it starts at the farm. And which the older I've got and the more I think about it, it's probably right. Another quote used to be from the older generation, older than me, if that's possible, is 20% of breeding, 80% what goes down their neck. Well, today, I think it's 50-50. To become consistent, I think we've got to start off with the basis. Good pastures, good well-managed pastures, infrastructure like good fences, yards, and to make it a bit easier for our employees and ourselves, and of course genetics. We bought the wholesale business in 95, and before that we were supplying cattle for about 10 years to this fellow. So virtually we've had, 85 is 15, that's 38 years of continued supply with this particular business. Our biggest advantage is consistent. To be consistent, we are talking 52 weeks of the year. There's no easy feat. In that 52 weeks, there's many, many variables. We have to commence with the right animal. That is where you producers play a very important role for our livelihood. We look for well-bred, soft-skinned cattle with a neat head. My grandfather used to say, a good head, rest will follow. And I think that's probably pretty true. Our cattle are backgrounded on very, very smart pastures for 4 to 6 weeks, probably closer to 5 to 6 weeks with self-feeders. We expect these cattle to perform from day one, so cattle must be handled quietly. We have found with better facilities, our staff are much happier. And I have a saying that if they can leave our property happy, there's every chance the next day they'll come to work happy. If they're happy, they're more efficient and less sick days and also less injuries. This all adds up to less bruising, very few dark cutters. Now, dark cutters is a thing the industry that costs us. We had our boys at boarding school in Sydney And I got friendly with the principal, and he brought his son up one day to spend some time with our son, and he said, why don't you sell some meat to they've had a butcher shop down at the school, and why don't you sell some bodies to the butcher shop? Anyhow, we did. And we found that there was an avenue for our dark cutters, because dark cutting meat eats well, but doesn't present well. And as long as the kids enjoyed their steak or whatever food they had, the dark cutting didn't meet. And that worked for a number of years until I got rid of the butcher shop. But it just shows that dark cutting meat can be used. With our consistent quality, we've been able to supply our butchers for many years. Some shops since 1995. So next year will be our 40th year supplying Woolworths. I think if we can focus on better bulls, and there's been a huge improvement over the years, better pastures so stock can be heavier at an earlier age, this will add up to more consistent product that the consumer can enjoy.
There's probably some really good stories of when you started supplying beef down to Sydney many, many years ago, which we probably don't have time for tonight.
I can't tell.
Yeah. Excellent. So, Geoff, following on from that, obviously consistency right across the supply chains, but from your point of view, mate, as beef producers, or especially commercial, we're all heavily influenced by demand and supply pressures, which are often out of producers' control. And we all end up becoming price takers, which is always problematic. So as both a commercial and stud breeder, how do you see commercial producers being able to extract more value from their product in the future?
Well, I guess as a breeder, I'll attack this by saying I think we've got to understand what our product is to a very high degree. So I've got a view that probably rather than maximisation, we've moved into an era of optimisation. So that's optimising your genetics with your environment and ultimately finding a market for your cattle that aligns with what you're producing. I think as we go through, we'll start to see that there becomes a point and you work backwards from that product that you're hoping that the box that your meat is going into, and you design a production system to fulfill that and ultimately hit that spec more and more and more as you go on. There's tweaks you can do with genetics, but there's a point where your genetics will just align with the product that you're trying to produce. And if they don't align, well, that's largely an unsustainable equation. So yeah, I just sort of encourage breeders these days to start thinking about, what's a spec that they can hit and redesign their production system from genetics and environment back from that. I think as an industry, the worst thing we can do is give an unfulfilling experience. So that would be, meat that a consumer has a certain expectation on that it fails to deliver on. So the more we can know our product, the more we can know our genetics, the more we can dictate our environment to arrive at a consistent product, I think the industry will benefit from.
You understand now why I said he had to come on and talk tonight. We always get a great answer out of Geoff whenever we do these things. So back to Bryce. Now, Bryce, I'm quoting numbers here, so just follow me, and there's a reason for that. So with Camm Ag Group that you're running at the moment, you turn off about 50,000 head of cattle annually, and you manage a breeder herd of about 30,000 head over 1 million acres of country. And most of, or a fair chunk of those cattle are fattened through the Wonga Pains feedlot that you run. Now, as I said, I only quote these numbers because when you're dealing with large numbers, the leaking out of the production systems of value at various points becomes really easy. And so that can have a significant impact on profitability. So from your point of view, mate, looking right through your supply chain, what are you specifically focused on to be able to, pick up those leakages and also maximise that profit going forward?
It feels very interesting sitting here about consistency when I got to be honest and say that some days in our business, the opposite of consistency seems more relevant. But I guess looking at that relationship, but particularly between a pastoral business and the feedlot and the differences in that, particularly around that theme of consistency as well. A feedlot is very easy to run a consistent model. That's absolutely what industry best practice is trying to do. Follow the pattern of daylight hours between winter and summer in terms of bunk hauling, do that, and keep that consistent, keep start times of feeding consistent, keep animal health, protocols consistent, keep your flake densities. There are so many things that we measure, control, manage in a feedlot environment. right down to our staffing as well about, I guess, how we train them to roll out those tasks. So that absolutely is so focused, and you have so much data and I guess integrity in that data about particularly then being able to minimise those losses or maximise the opportunity around production or cutting costs or making things more efficient. I guess in the pastoral setting, I guess because so often we are in an environment at the elements, and one thing about that is it does not tend to be consistent. And I guess in our business, that relationship in having an integrated feed yard is so crucial, because sure, you ask any feedlot, oh yes, particularly a breeder that then has a feedlot, oh yes, we're all trying to get that beast to 450 kilos. But just ask them to see all of their induction weights for a year. There's plenty of times they're nowhere near 450 or even 400. And for us, our feedlot is our buffer in managing our buffel grass paddock. If the season says that the beast has to be inducted at 380, guess what? He's being inducted at 380. And that, I think, while your target is consistency, that adaptability to the situation that you find yourself in, be that driven by season or driven by cost of gain because of price of commodity or the value of cattle, means that we will make those alterations across our business. And I guess that, back to your question, in minimising those losses is part of that relationship. We try to remain in our business true to, I guess, the break in enterprises that, if the live export boat out of Townsville says that Brahman steers are worth $4, guess where they're going? And if that was, that's way over the odds of what we can pay at the feedlot. And we price every mob of cattle just like we price every ton of grain we grow into the feed yard. But you can't jump and shift every mob. There'll be the outliers that you'll go and take the opportunity on. But if you're in a supply chain business, in my mind, you've got to stay the course with that, even though economically there might have been 10 cents that you've left on the table if you had realised them at that point. And that's a conversation we have a lot about how we price cattle through, but also, I guess, where that value creation or what part of the business that occurs in.
What's the old saying? I'm consistently inconsistent. Which always I've seen plenty of times happen. So thanks for that, Bryce. And yeah, it seems to be a real challenge, especially for entrepreneurs, to be able to stick with something when there's so much noise going on around. It's very easy to flip-flop or jump onto the next best thing. So Robert, leading on to that, you run your own feedlot as well. And as Bryce has sort of alluded to there, a feedlot is designed specifically to sort of mitigate the inconsistencies in the system, such as the weather, the amount of feed that's out there, the quantity and the quality. And so theoretically, once you put a beast in the yard, if they're the same weight, same size, they should come through and perform in the exact same manner. But we know that's not the case. And so you could sort of infer that genetics would have a reasonable influence on that. So how important do you think genetics or genetic consistency is to everyone in the supply chain, from the commercial producer right up to that butcher shop sale of beef?
I think the biggest change in my lifetime is the quality of cattle, genetics. In the 70s, I was a competitor in the Merrill show, and being someone pretty young then and in a new area, and people didn't give us much of a hope, I bought this Hereford steer, and it was in about, say, August or September, and I thought he was pretty handy. Fed him for the rest of the year and on the oats the next year, and at 2-year-old, he weighed 600 pound dead. And I thought I was made. 600 pound, 273 kilo. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room, us included, that we've had 14-month-old calves today weigh 350 dead. That's a big, big change in 40 years. In our business for genetics, we've got to buy about 400 cattle a week. Of those 400, 220 are feeder cattle, about 380 to 400 kilo, 120 trade heifers, and they're 250 to 270, and about 60 well-muscled European cross cattle for the Asian trade in Sydney. Now, genetics plays a big part in these purchases. With our Woolworths cattle, we love Angus cross cattle. They're so simple. And the Woolworths grid's so simple. They're 215 kilo to 315 kilo, 6 mil of fat to 17 mil of fat, 285 kilo average, simple. Now, trade heifers, we buy them in at 250 to 270 kilo, and they go to our butchers. We're pretty proud of the butchers we serve. They're on the top end of the trade. The quality they want is the right weight. And when we say the right weight, if a butcher wants 200 kilo, he'll put up with 205. 206 could be a problem. He wants them well finished, hence meat eating quality. I was very proud today that our meat at the NAB barbecue at the sale ate well. If I hadn't have eaten it well, I wouldn't be here tonight. And that was just a run of our own meat. That was nothing special, but that's the quality that we produce week in, week out. And the other thing with the trade cattle is they've got to be the right weight. Yield comes into it. Now, a butcher, and this has been our consistently successful, is that the butchers can buy our cattle each week and very little is waste. If a butcher requires his body's 200, he won't put up with 240 kilo. He'll give us 5 kilo tolerance because he has consumers that he has to supply. And it's always a challenge, I can tell you. So how do we achieve this week after week? We've got to do it 52 weeks a year. Well, the cattle that we'll buy this week ending the 23rd of August, we expect them to be off the third week of November. Because we run about 5,500 cattle in normal times between the pastures and the feedlot, we've got very little tolerance with mistakes. We can't say to our suppliers, people we supply in November, oh, I'm sorry, something went wrong 4 weeks ago. There's no excuses, because if you let someone down, it leaves the gate open for someone else to come in. So when we buy these cattle, we process them, and we're in a stage now that we've worked ourselves into this, that we unload our store cattle in 5 different areas, so that's minimise disease. The background in the paddocks are approximately 110 to 130 on our very good balanced pastures when it rains with a self-feeder. We can't manage our pastures as well as we wish because we've got to have these cattle every week of the year. So how we do manage our pasture is that 130, as the season deteriorates, it might get back to 70, and therefore they can't be out there as long. We've built yards between every 2 paddocks, sometimes in a corner to service 4 paddocks. This enables us to yard our new cattle every 4 days. We have a problem with respiratory disease as well as lame cattle. All our cattle come from sale yards. Some of them travel from Dalby from Wodonga in Victoria. Sometimes in January we go down to Hamilton, so that's a fair hike on the cattle. They're back around for 5-6 weeks, and then we'll draft those cattle to come to the feedlot. We don't bring them all in. If there's some that might need a bit longer in the pasture, well, they'll be mixed with old cattle. We never mix new cattle. We built the feed mill in 1993 to produce a consistent meal. There's that word again, consistent. The ration will change with the cattle. Example, start off the new cattle, then onto a number 3 ration for our paddock cattle, then to the feedlot ration. But it's consistent. And we have a lot of luck supplying a lot of schools to feed their steers, and it gives me a thrill when they win their grand champion. The end result we've got to aim for is a meal that someone can enjoy. Because if you look at meat, there's a lot of cheaper alternatives. And I've seen it from first-hand experience. If someone has a bad meat-eating experience, next week's not meat. It'll be chicken, it'll be whatever. So that's what as producers we've got to be wary of, that we must satisfy the paying consumer. We're very proud of the product that we can supply. If something goes wrong, we can't blame anybody but ourselves. It's interesting, genetics. Each year with Woolworths and Merrill Show, we'll buy 200 steers off a number of producers. And 3 or 6 steers, maximum 6 steers per person. those 200 steers are put together into 2 paddocks, background in 2 paddocks and into 2 pens. And the variety of genetics is unbelievable. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I think if we continue to do this trial, somehow we've got to eliminate the lower genetics. Rejects cost you money. If the cattle are not right, they cost. So I guess it's up to the producer to take it on board that we've got to have an animal that suits markets, that everyone can make money out of the market. Like it's no good someone making more money than they should, because the producer's got to make money, the processor has to make money, the consumer has to enjoy it. So the challenge is there.
The one thing I love about your position is, for most producers, it ends at the sale yards or at the farm gate. And so what I love about your story, Robert, is the fact that you're getting to get feedback at every single end. So at the feed mill, I know my dad is your greatest fan. He's always buying feed off you for his show steers, and you get feedback there. You're getting feedback when you get into the feedlot. You're getting feedback at the abattoir. You're getting feedback from the butcher shops. So you're probably one of those real rare people that gets to see truly where all that consistency flows through and the problems that it causes potentially down the track. So that's fantastic. Now, Geoff, I remember you said to me something, mate, when you had your first sale on, which really stuck with me. And I was walking through the bulls, or Dad and I were walking through the bulls with your folks. And the one thing that I noticed is the bulls were all so even at the time. And I remember I said to you, made that comment, and you said, Ben, I'm 100% focused on consistency. I'm not chasing the outlier. And I sort of said, well, you know, that really caught me interest, because what I see and what I see complaints come through from the stud industry occasionally is that breeders can be too focused on those outliers. So trying to get that absolute cracker of all, that outlier is just, and then not focusing on making sure we increase the average quality. Now, I know that's not the case right across the board, but that's a complaint that's sometimes made. Now, could you share with me, you know, how you came to that conclusion, I suppose you'd say, and how important you think it is chasing consistency rather than just that 1 in a million outlier?
A consistent animal will be homozygous in the traits that they've got. So, and what I mean by that is that there's common traits or attributes of each parent that's coming through. And the more common that you can have in those traits, the less variation that's possible. So I think that's how I see it in terms of the animals. I just try to make them very even and offer genetically very similar attributes. I guess the seed was planted with me, and this is probably going to sort of raise a few eyebrows for people in the Angus industry, but at Gardner Angus Ranch in Kansas. And I was sort of going around with Tony and Greg Gardner, and at the time we'd not long been breeding Angus cattle, and I was sort of asking this Greg, and we were using a GAR bull, and I said, you know, I made mention of this bull and a sort of, you know, pretty vague sort of answer about how he was, and mentioned him again, and yeah, about the same sort of level of interest. And he sort of turned to me and he said, look, our bull clients want a certain type of bull here. We're producing 700 to 1,000 of those through a sale. And he said, my job is to make sure that the 700 to 1,000 all meet their demands and are sold to that client base. If something comes through and it's an outlier and it goes on and, you know, and it attracts more interest, he said that bull might sell for, you know, 100,000 or whatever it may be. But he said they're not the bulls that we go and turn around and use, because the variation that they're going to go and create in due course is going to make our job to sell 700 to 1,000 bulls more difficult in the future. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good way to look at it, because everyone likes to see something that's 100 kilos heavier, 100 kilos, you know, 3 inches wider. But if you look at them in the herd and you find that animal, his genes under that similar environment are expressing something different. Now, will he carry those genes into a commercial setting where they ultimately all end up breeding? Well, probably not, if his pedigree's sort of what I would call fire and ice. So I think we just need to be mindful about, and again, it comes back to know the product that we're aiming for, think about the cattle that we're going to use to hit that spec, and then manage them in our environment to achieve that outcome. And to me, that sort of sums up consistency in livestock breeding.
Thanks, Geoff. And that brings back to the quote, it's consistency that produces excellence. So, yeah, thanks very much for that, Geoff. And we've spent a lot of time in cars driving up to Beef Week and things like that, now to the Roma Young Beef Producers Forum, and had these conversations. And I know you thought deeply about a lot of this. So thanks for sharing that. Well, that's it for our questions tonight. Well, I hope you got as much out of that as I did. And I really enjoy doing these episodes each year, and I look forward to the 2025 event. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you share it with your family and friends. And if you want to support what we do, make sure you like us on the socials, being Facebook and Instagram. And the best thank you we can get from you is a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as that's how more and more rural producers find and get access to what we're doing. Now that's it for this week, and I'll see you on the next instalment of Wealth and Wisdom.